Yo, what's going on, YouTube? And welcome back to Goal Line Hockey. It's your boy Kevin Forte, and today we are taking a look at the Vancouver Canucks as we're going to go over some mock trades for a pair of pretty big name players on the Canucks organization. This is a team that's going through a lot of issues, and the other day we heard from Jim Rutherford. He said that the Vancouver Canucks plan on changing their core going forward. So that's a pretty big report. This is a team that's in a state of transition out of the Jim Benning era. And, unfortunately, they've made a lot of mistakes here. And even in the new regime, under their new management with Patrick Allvin and Rutherford, this team continues to struggle. And we are going to see some pretty big changes. Now, there have been some reports about number 40's name being floated around out there, and I don't really think there's much to that. And the only way that they're going to trade Elias Pettersson is if he refuses to sign a contract extension. That's really the only way I would see them having to kind of force their hand to make a move, but they're not really in that position right now. So, with that said, the two names are Horvat and Boeser. And speaking of some pretty big changes in the organization, those are two pretty big name players. And recently on the 32 Thoughts podcast, Jeff Merrick on the 32 Thoughts podcast stated Bo Horvat could be a long-term fit for the Edmonton Oilers. And Horvat would be interested in signing there. He wonders if the Oilers will look for security in the chance one of their two big guys doesn't re-sign with the Oilers, specifically Draisaitl, who is only a couple of years away from becoming an unrestricted free agent. So that's very interesting. The big problem here is the Oilers' cap space. This is a team that does not have a lot of room to make a lot of moves. And, in their situation, you'd have to take money going to Vancouver. And then again, these are two divisional rivals in the Pacific Division. Two teams that you don't necessarily want to see, again, the optics of trading the Canucks captain to the Edmonton Oilers isn't necessarily something that I think a lot of Canucks fans are going to be completely on board with. We also heard, and this is from Michael Russo, he thinks that Elias Pettersson would like to move on from the Canucks. Well, I don't necessarily know about that. The Nashville Predators are one of the teams that have called in on Bo Horvat, and that's from Rick Dhaliwal. That's kind of an interesting one because I look at them as a situation where if you're looking at Nashville, they need to be a little bit closer to the playoffs. I don't think they're a team right now that's, again, it's not to say they're not capable of making the playoffs and going on a run, but are they willing to give up potentially this year and next year's first-round picks for Bo Horvat? I don't necessarily know if that's the best move for David Poile. It could be the best move he makes in Nashville or potentially his last in Nashville, depending on how things go. We also heard an interesting thing here from Dhaliwal. He said the Vancouver Canucks have checked in on Ivan Provorov, and the Vancouver Canucks are a team that, similar to the Philadelphia Flyers, we're hearing some pretty big assets moving both ways. Maybe they could end up making a trade with each other. The Philadelphia Flyers have Kevin Hayes, Ivan Provorov available, while the Canucks have Boeser, Hughes, and Horvat. And I think they want to keep Hughes, and they really want somebody to play with him. And if you get a guy like Ivan Provorov to play with Quinn Hughes, that would be one of the better top pairing defenses in the league. And I think a new fresh start for Ivan Provorov is the best thing right now. And, I'm going to end up talking about him in another video, so stay tuned for that. But I think that's another interesting name that's been thrown out there. The Canucks have also checked in on Matt Dumba. So, really when you look at the Canucks here, we keep thinking, oh, they're going to trade for draft picks and prospects and stuff. That's not necessarily the case. In a package here for potentially Horvat or Boeser, I think Boeser, it's more likely going to be like an actual asset and maybe taking another bad salary, which, again, we're going to talk about today. But the fact that they're looking at some veteran defensemen like Provorov and Dumba, definitely something interesting. Now, another name that was also on here was Matthias Ekholm. And he's got some term on his deal. I wonder if the Canucks could take a swing on Ekholm. If they're a team that thinks that maybe they're a year or two away, maybe they would be willing to make that move. And then to end this before we get into our mock trades, Rick Dhaliwal also said the Canucks would like a second-round pick at the very least if they end up trading Andrei Kuzmenko. And I think that's a terrible mistake. The second you trade a guy like Kuzmenko away, you're automatically going to be looking for his replacement. So he's one of those guys that, you know what, he doesn't score as prolifically as you want, but the second he's gone, you automatically want him back, or you want some similar player back. So I think the Canucks have to be smart with Kuzmenko. If they can clear the cap space, they really should try and find a way to keep him around long term. So let's get into my mock trades. So this is a little bit interesting. So we're going to start off with Bo Horvat. So Bo Horvat is kind of interesting here. I have two teams. I have the Oilers and the Avalanche that could make a deal with the Vancouver Canucks for their captain. So the Edmonton Oilers, I have this year's and next year's first round picks. I know it is a heavy price, but that's really what we're looking at here. And the prospect here isn't necessarily anything that great. It is Marcus Niemelainen. He is a draft pick from a couple years ago. He's a defenseman. And we know how critical it is for this Canucks team to add some blue line depth. And I think a guy like Niemelainen is going to get some more ice time, potentially more opportunities with the Canucks than he will with the Oilers. And as the Oilers kind of seem like they're destined to maybe bring in a defenseman as well at this year's deadline, it might leave room for a guy like Niemelainen, to kind of get out the door. And chances are he's not going to get much ice time. So I think that the Oilers, like I said, it's 2 first-round picks. But when you really think about it, if they end up keeping Horvat long-term and you have the potential of having 3 of McDavid, Draisaitl, and Horvat on the same team for a playoff run, that's a pretty tough combination to go up against. And, you consider potentially all 3 of those guys are capable of being a first-line center. That's a tough team to beat come playoff time. I don't care how you slice it. That could be a really really a great team, honestly, down the middle. Same thing here for the Colorado Avalanche. The Avalanche here, I also have 2 first-round picks, but they definitely have the better offer on the table. The only real prospect that I look at that is of any value here in Colorado at this point is Alexander Newhook. And I know that Colorado would try their best to keep him around. But it sounds like Vancouver, if they can, would like to add to their center depth, especially if you're losing a guy like Bo Horvat. You want a replacement to that type of player. There's been rumors even with the Islanders about saying Arttu Räty or one of those guys. You want a center in return, and Alexander Newhook is the guy that fits that bill for the Colorado Avalanche going to Vancouver. So that's the 2 mock trades I have for Bo Horvat. With that said, for Brock Boeser, things are a little bit more complicated. The contract situation does go past this season, and, he's not seen as a contract that's all that great. It's kind of an unattractive contract, so it would have to be sort of a trade where you're kind of a trade for trade, maybe a trade, a player for player and an asset, and they are able to get actually some assets out of a potential trade, and we'll look at that in a second. So the first one is the Minnesota Wild. They've been tied to the Wild for a little while now. And the Minnesota Wild, again, this is kind of a risky play here, but it's something to consider. I look at Jordan Greenway. Jordan Greenway's contract, $3 million per season. I think it's 2 or 3 years left on that deal. I think they'd like to try and move that money. Again, the problem is you're taking on more salary with Boeser. So unless there's a deal where they trade Dumba and Greenway and try and make something work with Boeser that way, and then they end up trading a second and Boeser, they could do something like that. But honestly, Boeser's contract kind of makes this tough. And again, Minnesota's trying to save money here because they have some contracts to re-sign. They just signed Matt Boldy to a massive extension coming off of his entry-level deal. And they're also going to have to re-sign Kalen Addison on the blue line this summer. So if they're looking to bring in that, they want to create that cap space. And remember, the Suter Parise buyouts are going to be really, taking their toll on the Wild this year and next in the summertime. They need to free up as much cap space as possible. And I think moving out players like Jordan Greenway and Dumba, that frees you up almost $8 million, and I think that's something that, again, you're taking on Boeser, which is $6 million, but that you still save $2 million for a guy that can score. And again, the problem with Boeser is his health, and that's why I honestly don't see this trade working. But again, crazier things have happened. Maybe it's a part of a bigger trade. Maybe Kuzmenko comes in or something like that. It would have to be something pretty cataclysmic. But I think that there could be something there. Again, it's finding a way to make the salary work. And I think in order for Bill Guerin to justify a trade right now, he's trying to move out salary. And bringing in Boeser isn't necessarily moving out salary. It's going to take a lot of Minnesota's own money coming out in order to make that work. So we'll see how that goes. The Pittsburgh Penguins, I think this is actually a very realistic trade. And it is Kasperi Kapanen and a New Jersey Devils third-round pick this year for Brock Boeser. So you have to look at this from either perspective. So for Vancouver, it's not necessarily about the money here. For Vancouver, it's more about, well, we'd like to get the third-round pick. I think Boeser's problem is they don't really see a ton of value right now with Boeser from across the league, but Kasperi Kapanen is kind of a dead contract in Pittsburgh. He needs a fresh start. He's really struggled. I've heard these rumors now for really the last 2 years. It's a shame how things have worked out for Kapanen in Pittsburgh. He had one really good season, and that was kind of it. And it's really frustrating to see how things have kind of worked there. He's making $3.2 million for this year and next, but if there's the chance of bringing in Boeser, I think Pittsburgh should try and do it. And if it only costs you Kapanen, who's a contract you're trying to move anyway, and giving up a third-round pick for a guy that can score, I would take that deal if I'm Pittsburgh. But again, depends on how badly does Vancouver want to get rid of Boeser's contract. And I think that's kind of what you're looking at here. Would you rather pay $6 million for this year and next for Boeser, or $3 million for the next 2 years for Kapanen? Right? And teams are going to have to figure out which one is more valuable and which one is, are we worried about the money side of things, or are we more worried about winning a Stanley Cup? And Pittsburgh right now, with where they are, probably more worried about the Stanley Cup than Vancouver and the money side of things. So just something to keep an eye on. Overall, I look at Horvat. I think he's going to go to Colorado in some kind of trade. I don't know if it's Alexander Newhook, but some type of player. The problem that Colorado's starting to have now is they don't necessarily have the prospects that they used to have. Because, again, they're not trading Bowen Byram anytime soon. I think that would be very shocking if they were to make that kind of move. They do have their first-round picks, but behind that, they have, no second-round picks for the next 2 years, no third-round picks for the next 2 years. Colorado's definitely paid their dues for winning that Stanley Cup last year, and if they want to continue to keep that window open and potentially pick up a Horvat, it's going to be pretty expensive. But I have Colorado at the end of the day getting Bo Horvat or Nashville. I do think Nashville could be on the radar. As for Boeser, I do end up thinking he ends up going to Pittsburgh. I think he ends up going to the Pittsburgh Penguins, maybe in a deal for Kapanen in some sort of deal. But I really think that those are the two best fits. Colorado and Pittsburgh for both Boeser and Horvat. Guys, let me know what you think down below of these mock trades. Leave some mock trades of your own down in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next time.